Hello, everyone. So it has been a bit. There have been a bunch of changes. So I have a new job, which involves a much longer commute, and I also have a cutie. I found a Milo. Ugh. He was. All right, come on, buddy. Whoop! Sorry. I found him by the side of the road a couple of months ago, and he is a good boy. His name is Milo. He is a 1-year-old Beagle Basset mix. So he is mine now, and he is a very cute little puppy. You wanna go back downstairs? You wanna hang out here? Okay, that's fine. You be where you're comfortable. He is a good boy. So it has been a bit. I'm sorry, but we are back. We have more book to read, and we have Milo to snuggle with. Hello, good boy. Are you going to keep me company the entire book? Okay. I love you. You're a good boy. You're a good boy. Okay, let's turn the camera down a little bit so you can see Milo, because he's cute. All right. So we are continuing the legend of Huma, and on chapter 23. When Huma awoke, he felt bruised over every inch of his body, but otherwise he seemed unharmed. He stood up and gazed at the wholesale destruction. The force of two such tremendous masses as the dragons had been enough to level much of the timber in the immediate area. Hi. Hi. Yes, I do love you. Whoop! Maybe you should hop down, puppy. What? Hop down. I love you. You're a good boy. I love you very much. Do not eat books. Char's inert form lay to one side, its neck snapped. The hideous face still had a toothy, upside-down smile. The deadly claws pointed uselessly into the air. There was no sign of the silver dragon, even though there was at least some of the blood had come from her. She must have moved under her own power, but to where? Where also were his companions? Huma could hear no sounds and was disoriented as to what direction they must be in. The dragon lance and the saddle lay nearby, where he supposed the silver dragon had fallen. The dragon lance still gleamed brightly, and Huma felt little better just to see it. At least one enemy rider and one red dragon remained, but where were they? He could not very well carry the lance on his shoulders. It was more than twice his height. His only real option was to drag it. So he looped some rope around the shield and tied it together, and then he pulled it over his head in one arm. In his free arm, he held his sword, which had managed to survive the fall. Dragging proved awkward, and Huma was barely away from the scene of the destruction before he caught the lance on an upturned tree root. The knight put down his sword and began to work the very lengthy weapon around. It came loose suddenly, and Huma fell against a tree trunk. Every bruise in his body screamed, and more than a minute elapsed before he was able to sit up and coordinate his thoughts. The first thing he did was to reach for his blade, and it proved to be an excellent decision. The heavy axe struck the tree exactly at the level where his neck had been. Huma tumbled forwards as he grabbed his sword and attempted to untangle himself. To his surprise, no other attack was forthcoming. Instead, his attacker boomed forth with laughter. "You can have all the time you need, Knight of Salamia. It won't do you a bit of good." Huma threw the rope down. He tightened his grip on the sword. He looked up to study his adversary and shook his head, not believing what he saw. It had to be a trick. Warlord Crinus was casually removing his battle axe from the tree trunk that he had nearly severed. His plain ebony armor was dented and dirty in many places, but the warlord seemed in perfect health otherwise. His face remained hidden behind his visor, but his eyes glowed frost blue. The tall, ominous figure should have been dead. Crinus took a step forwards. His deep voice hissed. "I'm so pleased you survived, Huma of the Order of the Crown. You were lucky the day when we first met in the sky over that no-man's land. By rights, I should have cleaved your head from your body. That accidental victory of yours never should have happened. And I have remembered it ever since." One of the warlord's heavy boots came down on the limb of a fallen tree and snapped it neatly. "I am the greatest of her infernal majesty's commanders. She would have lost the war long ago if it had not been for me." I've heard different, Huma dared to say. Some say the greatest is Galandrakos. Crinus gave the double-bladed axe a practice swing. He has his uses, but I distrust his loyalty. The warlord paused and went on in a different tack. Your thrust in that first short encounter was a lucky one. As I said, that never should have happened. Why not? See for yourself, if you're fortunate enough, the warlord charged Huma. Huma ducked the first swing, and the axe bit into yet another tree. With incredible strength, the warlord turned the pull into a second attack, forcing the knight back as the axe suddenly came swinging back over his head. This time, Huma found an opening and thrust, but his aim was off and the weapon deflected off the commander's breastplate. Crinus laughed and renewed his vicious assault. Huma stumbled back and back as he sought to escape the continuing onslaught. The axe missed Huma again by only inches. This time, though, the warlord had miscalculated, and the shaft of the axe struck hard against the side of a tree, bouncing out of Crinus' hands. Daring everything, Huma lunged. This time there was no mistaking the accuracy of his thrust. The sword came up and caught Crinus in the unprotected portion of his neck. Huma's blade did not stop until it reached the back of the warlord's helmet. The black-clad figure stumbled away, attempting to wrest the sword from his opponent as he did so. The warlord stumbled, dropped his axe, and tripped. On his hands and knees, he gave a death rattle. Then, the warlord's maddening sound reverted to something more familiar and chilling. While Huma watched, spellbound, Crinus slowly lifted himself to his feet, turned towards Huma, and smiled. The mortal wound across the warlord's neck was little more than a scar. He seemed proud. I cannot die, Knight of Salamnia. I will heal instantly. I am, as I said, the greatest commander my lady has. My death would be a terrible blow to her. Thus, I demanded of Galandrakos this protection. At first, his attempt was only partially successful, almost to my eternal regret. Thus our foreshortened battle. My men would have taken you, but I wanted you for myself, and they would not dare go against my wishes. I wanted you for what you had almost done. The battle-axe came at Huma again. The knight was fully on the defensive now. For how does one slay an opponent who heals instantly? Crinus had the strength of many and the stamina to match. The warlord laughed at Huma's efforts to dodge him and stay alive. Crinus was being openly careless, allowing his swings to go wild, taunting the knight with his immortality. I'd expected more of a fight from you, young knight. You disappoint me. Huma backed into a tree. Crinus screamed as he swung the axe. The deadly blade narrowly missed Huma as the knight dove at the warlord. Behind him, the axe cut deep into a tree. The two collapsed into a heap and struggled. It was evident to Huma that he did not have the strength to match the warlord. Crinus pushed the knight away and tried to strangle him, but Huma kicked him with his knee and threw his adversary off balance. Both scrambled to their feet and faced one another. Huma still had his sword. The warlord was weaponless. What are you waiting for? The ebony-armored commander gloated. Run me through. I'll still kill you with my hands. Huma tried to stall while his mind raced for ideas. How is it your army functions without you? Aren't you afraid they'll blunder? Crinus laughed shortly. Drakos is a competent commander. Besides, the time has come when my leadership can be spared. It is simply a matter of mopping up those who remain around Vingard Keep. I leave such minor details to my staff. The battle-axe lay only a short distance away. Huma took a step towards the weapon. If only he could get at the axe. Crinus screamed and threw himself onto Huma's blade. The knight released his hold and leapt for the battle-axe. The warlord's movements slowed as he attempted to pull the sword from his body. Huma picked up the battle-axe and turned back to his opponent. Seemingly in no pain, the warlord began extracting the blade from his body. Huma raised the axe. Crinus turned towards him. The cut was clean, and the helmeted head of the warlord went flying. The warlord's body slumped to its knees. Huma threw down the battle-axe with distaste. This was not his way. The headless corpse rose to its feet again. All color drained from Huma's face. With definite precision, the hands of the decapitated creature removed the broadsword and tossed it away. Huma could see the wound sealing itself. Even the armor, like a second skin, sealed itself. Huma waited for the thing to turn to him, but it was as if he never existed, for the headless body began to walk off towards where the warlord's head had flown. Huma could run, he knew, but the warlord would follow, never tiring. Sagas! The cry came from the direction of the undead Crinus. Huma scooped up his sword. He knew of only one who would give such an oath. If Kaz were around, the others were likely to be nearby, and the Dragonlance. Of course! Huma broke through the foliage. There was Kaz astride his horse, the Minotaur's mouth agape. The others were nowhere to be seen. The Minotaur's eyes stretched wide as the body of Crinus neared the disembodied head, which wobbled and tipped as if it still functioned. Kaz! It must not reach the head! The Minotaur urged his horse forward at the abomination that called itself Crinus. The warlord charged forwards until it was within 6 feet of the headless Crinus, then abruptly came to a halt, shrieking. Kaz wasted no time. He jumped off the panicked steed and raced the body for the head. Huma, meanwhile, had returned to the Dragonlance. The knight picked up the shaft. Huma! Kaz burst through the foliage, nearly impaling himself on the Dragonlance. In his right hand he held a grisly prize, which still vibrated with ghastly life. Behind the Minotaur came the sounds of something thrashing towards them with great purpose. Drop it! Huma indicated the head. Over there! Quickly! The Minotaur tossed the head in front of the tip of the Dragonlance, just as the gauntleted hand came into sight. The headless body froze and then dove to the side before they could impale it. It knows! Said the Minotaur with a snort. Worse yet, as the body rose, it held out one hand, clutching the fallen and forgotten battle axe. This is madness, Kaz muttered. What is going on here? Cried a new voice. Both Huma and Kaz looked up as the silver dragon hovered above them. She appeared drawn, and one of her forelegs hung limply, but the power still resided within her. She turned her gaze from the two and stared at the horrible creature. Is that? The body reached for its head. Paladin! The silver dragon uttered in shock. She inhaled sharply even as Crinus put down the battle axe and picked up its head. The arms of the monstrosity were raising the head high, even as she unleashed a torrent of flame. Dragon flame engulfed the warlord. The body wobbled, sank to its knees, and both of the head and trunk vanished in the purifying flame. Within seconds, no sign of the unliving Crinus could be seen within the miniature inferno. The dragon landed in the clearing and readied herself for a second strike. That should be the end of that thing, she said. Wait! Kaz cried. He rushed to the fire and picked up the battle axe which had escaped the blast. He tossed the axe into the fire and then raced away as the weapon exploded. Bits of metal and wood scattered through the forest. Kaz cursed as a tiny piece of metal struck him on the shoulder. Sir! Gods! I cannot leave you alone at any time, Huma. The two rose and dusted themselves off. The silver dragon, meanwhile, blew out the fire with a cold blast that left ice clinging to the nearest trees. Didn't know you could do that, Huma said to her. Her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. The chill and paralysis are among our normal abilities. The flame is possible for any dragon save the cowardly ice-dwelling wight. But it requires much of us, and I'm afraid I overexerted myself. I must rest. Huma nodded understanding, then glanced around. Kaz, where are Boron and Magus? Where are the Dragonlances? Where I left them, I suppose. When we saw the dragons fall in the distance, I volunteered to go ahead and see if you were still alive. Then you didn't see them? Who? We must get to them, fast! Huma turned to the silver dragon, but the great beast was slumped on the ground. Between the multiple wounds received from Char, the fall from which she had cushioned Huma, and the tremendous final effort that she had expended on the rampaging Crinus, she had reached her limit. Can we leave you here? He asked. Shining eyes opened and regarded him. I will be all right. I'm sorry I can be of no assistance. Kaz retrieved his horse, the largest of their mounts. Once Huma was secure, Kaz urged the animal forwards. They could hear the clash of arms well before they neared the spot where Kaz had left the others. Huma had assumed that what he had seen from above was an out-and-out attack. In this he was wrong. The Black Guard came upon Magus and Boron from an ambush. A bright light flashed before them, and Huma saw an ebony-armored figure go flying against a tree. It was not too late. Both Magus and Boron still lived, still fought. Huma did not wait for the horse to slow, but rather slid off and rolled to a crouch. Kaz removed his own battle axe and, with a cry, charged into the fray. Opal, baby, would you like to go out on the balcony? Okay, I will let you out on the balcony, because you're very cute and well-behaved. You can go too if you want, Milo. Magius crouched on the wagon, keeping most of the attackers at bay with short-lived spells. Boron stood on the ground behind the wagon, fighting off those guardsmen who had encircled the mage. The enemy was drawing tighter. Huma picked off his first opponent and charged into the next. As their blades clashed, Huma heard the howl. It was very near, and there was no mistaking it this time. A dread wolf. It leapt up onto the back of the dragon. Boron saw it first, but that brave knight could only shout. He was already engaged with two other foes. Magus, pale and drawn, turned to face the creature. The mage shouted and unleashed a spell, but it sputtered and evanesced before it reached its target. Magus had reached his limit. This time the Dreadwolf, or rather Galandrakos, since his was the mind that controlled the unliving creatures, did laugh. Huma succeeded in disposing of his guardsman adversary and tried to reach the wagon. He was cut off by two more ebony-armored guardsmen and could only glance helplessly as the burning eyes of the creature brightened and the renegade unleashed a spell of his own. Huma did not see what happened next, but when the wagon came into his view again, Magus was standing unharmed. The dragon lances had in some way protected him from Dracos' foul power. The Dreadwolf cringed back. Dracos had not expected this setback. Then, Huma was pressed back and Kaz was pulled from his horse. There was a flash of light and a tall, circular opening materialized in the air itself. It was a portal, the knight realized, a gate large enough to drive a wagon through. Huma struggled against the two warriors who blocked his path, and they gave quarter. A guardsman leapt up behind Magus, and the spellcaster turned just in time. The hapless attacker crashed to the ground. The Dreadwolf was nowhere to be seen. One of Huma's opponents made a fatal mistake and paid for it. The other fought with desperation. More guardsmen were swarming around the wagon. Boron seemed to have vanished. Two more black figures jumped onto the wagon, and this time Magus was not quick enough. One caught his arms and held him back while the other sought the reins. Other warriors began retreating through the portal, their destination most likely Galandrakos' citadel. Another guardsman joined the other two on the wagon. Huma finally slew his last adversary and charged towards the wagon. A white abomination blocked his path briefly, but it appeared more intent on retreating through the portal than anything else. It did not even glance in the knight's direction. Though the wagon was only yards from the portal, the driver hesitated as the portal seemed to blink in and out of existence. The horses fought him for control. One guardsman leapt off the cart as Huma reached it. At the same time, Magus succeeded in breaking the hold of his captor and pushed his hand in the man's visored face. A small burst through the guardsman back, but it was only enough to stun him. Magus half collapsed, the final effort exhausting him. He had no more power and little strength. He crawled forwards and tried to wrap his arm around the driver's neck. He succeeded in halting the progress of the wagon, but both men fell from the vehicle. One of the few remaining guardsmen shouted something, and then they were all retreating towards the gate. The horses, unsettled by all the commotion, again began to move. Huma grabbed the reins. The horses protested, but Huma began to shout commands to them. Kaz, daring everything, stood before the steeds and took hold of the bridles. With strength no human could match, he held the horses firm. He struggled a little more, then they struggled a little more, then finally gave in to his control. Huma slumped down on the driver's seat and nodded thankfully at the Minotaur. The portal vanished. A groan came from behind the wagon. Huma jumped up and sword ready, only to feel a sting of pain from his left leg. He looked down to see a long gash that a broadsword must have opened during the fighting. Kaz reached the groaning figure first. It was Boron, lying half underneath the wagon. His left arm was covered with blood, and there was a gash across his face. The blood from the facial wound had momentarily blinded him. "Are you hurt severely?" asked Huma. "My eyes sting, and I fear no one will ever use me as a sculptor's model, but the only true pain is in my arm. I'm thankful it was not my sword arm. I fear it will be useless for some time." Even as Boron spoke, Kaz was already at work on the knight's wounds. The Minotaur himself was covered with countless minor wounds, but he seemed unconcerned with his own welfare. Huma nodded and limped slowly to the front of the wagon. He peered over the far side and then froze. Magus! Magus, where was the spellcaster? Ignoring his pain, Huma leapt out of the wagon and searched the dead. All wore the black of Takhisis and her commanders. The few who had suffered at the power of the mage were easy to identify, but of Magus himself there was no sign. Near the woods, Huma spotted a small rod laying among the scattered remains of the attackers. He walked over and picked it up. The rod quivered, and Huma almost dropped it out of surprise. This surprise turned into fascination as the rod expanded, growing and growing until it was taller than Huma. It was the staff of Magus. A spellcaster was never without the staff. It had been lying directly beneath where the portal had been. Magus was in the hands of Galandrakos. Chapter 24. We do not know if he was indeed taken, Huma. And even if he is a prisoner of Galandrakos, it would be impossible for us to rescue him. We must have him in the citadel of the renegade himself, Kaz pointed out for the 100th time. Our best hope is to deliver the dragon lances to Vingard Keep and the Grand Master, Huma, Boron added. Huma nodded. They were both correct, he knew, but his inability to protect Magus, whom he had known nearly all of his life, gnawed at him. Boron, the wounded arm in a sling, drove the wagon now. Huma sat with the lances, watching the trio's backside. The silver dragon had volunteered to seek out the assistance of her kin, and Huma had approved the idea. With Crinus destroyed and his guardsmen in disarray, the trio should be safe for the time being. In actuality, a part of Huma almost desired a second accounting. Gotta get up for a second. Friends and I are having a barbecue tomorrow, and I made homemade mac and cheese. So I needed to let it cool off so it wouldn't get all watery and scunny in the fridge. The next few days passed without incident as the companions traveled towards Solamnia and Vingard Keep. There were times when Huma would wake to what he was sure were the cries of dread wolves, but nothing came of these. In all this time, the silver dragon did not return. No one cared to conjecture on this, although all three assumed it had something to do with the steadily advancing hordes of the Dragon Queen. Huma recalled the words of Crinus, that the Knights of Solamnia had been virtually defeated, and that Vingard Keep would soon fall. As much as he wished to believe otherwise, Huma tasted too much truth in those statements. By this time, they were far to the northwest of Kerboth. Huma recalled Lord Guy Avondale and prayed that they would pass this region without confronting the Argothian commander. After Huma's abrupt departure, he was not sure how Avondale would welcome him, nor was Huma confident as to what the Argothians would do once they saw the dragon lances. They might very well confiscate them. The trio was making good time, all things considered, but it was still not fast enough for Huma. The evil of Takhisis was enveloping everything, and Huma felt impotent. They crossed the plains now. That would continue for much of the journey. While it made their going easier, it also provided them with little cover. At midday, only 2 days from the border, they sighted a huge patrol, too far away to be identified, but it was plain the patrol had seen the trio as well, for the soldiers shifted in their direction and their pace quickened. Kaz removed his battle axe. Huma leapt from the back of the wagon and unsheathed his blade. Boron remained with the wagon and pulled out his sword and waited for the approach of the patrol. The bearded knight was the first to identify them. Turning to Huma, he said, "Argothians. Part of the northern army, I would say." There was no way to outrun them. How would the Argothians act when confronted with an axe-wielding minotaur and 2 knights from an order responsible, in great part, for the decay of the once mighty Argothian Empire? The commander of the patrol raised his hand as the group neared the trio. A broad, almost fat man with a small beard and thin gray hair. Milo is playing with his squeaky toy. He studied each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on Kaz, who, despite his nature, tried his best to look unthreatening. In Huma's opinion, the Minotaur failed completely. First, the Argothian addressed Boron. "You are from one of the outposts in the south, are you not?" "I am." Both knights stiffened. This commander was a keen observer. "Your companion knight is not," Huma answered. "Lord, I am Knight Huma of the Order of the Crown." "I see," said the Argothian, with about as much interest as if he had been told that there was grass growing on the plains. He pointed at Kaz. And that? Where did that come from? I've heard rumors. I, the Minotaur announced proudly, am Kaz. I have rebelled from my former masters and am now companion to Huma, most noble and brave of knights. That might have brought a few smiles to the faces of the Argothians, if they had not seen the dark look on the face of Kaz and knew that he meant every word of it. I am also a Minotaur. I am not a that. I see. The commander shifted his girth in the saddle and turned to Huma. I am Faran, and though we have never met, I and my men are presently attached to an acquaintance of yours, Lord Guy Avondale. Huma could not help but flinch. I see you remember him. I have been asked to escort you to him, and I will not take no for an answer. Huma looked at his two companions. The patrol outnumbered them and included more than a few archers. To resist would be foolish. As long as they survived, there was hope. We will gladly accept your escort. Faran smirked. I thought you might. He waved his hand and the patrol split, one half flanking each side of the wagon. There would be no escape. We have a day's journey ahead of us, so I would recommend that we waste no more valuable time. I must admit to being greatly surprised at your sudden absence that night, Huma, Lord Guy Avondale was saying the next day. The three of them sat alone before the chief commander in his tent. I have explained the circumstances. Yes, you have. Lord Avondale put down his goblet. The trio had been offered wine as well, but none of them had accepted. I should have known better, I grant that. But when we discovered that nest of pestilence, I was more than happy to accept the mage's assistance. Kaz, his patience wearing thin, stood up fiercely. We have been sitting here for the past 3 hours, 2 of which were wasted waiting for you, Commander. For the past hour you have spoken of nothing but false pleasantries and news so old. How much longer are we to put up with this? Are you going to let us pass into Solamnia with the lances? 2 guards came rushing in, but the commander waved them off. They did not leave the tent, Huma noticed. The Argothian put down his goblet. For the past 3 hours, and all of last night, I have been debating in my mind as to what to do with you and those weapons. In answer to your last question, yes, you may pass through with the lances. For what reason would I turn them over to the Emperor? He would merely mount them on some palace wall as the latest of his trophies, despite what they could do for all of Ansalon. Huma and Avondale locked gazes. Other than a few diehards, most of us are realistic to admit the truth. It is no longer the Emperor we truly fight for, although perhaps that once might have been the case. We are fighting for Urgoth, our homeland, and our families. That is what matters in the long run. Emperors come and go, but it is the people who sustain. We lost sight of that at some point, and a good portion of the Empire decided that they could do better without us. But you know that already, of course. Then, Huma said calmly, If what you say is true, then why are we being held here? You are not. We are waiting. Waiting for what? A horn signaled the approach of someone or something. Guy Avondale rose and smiled knowingly. I think that's them now. Come with me, please. They stood and followed the Argothian commander. They were trailed by the 2 guards. When they had entered the camp, the first thing Huma had noticed was the vast open plain situated before the tent of the commander. He'd wondered as to its purpose then, even as he had wondered until now, how Avondale had known where they were and that they were coming at all. But now the knight understood. The first to land was the Silver Dragon herself. She seemed fully healed and, in fact, greeted Huma with such enthusiasm that he was overwhelmed. I apologize for the delay, Huma, but it proved more difficult than I thought to locate assistance. But I have found them. 2 more Silver Dragons landed, 1 female and 1 male. They were introduced as the Silver Dragon's siblings, and both greeted and gazed at Huma with such seriousness it was as if they were inspecting him. Huma returned their greeting with some unease. The final newcomer was a bronze-colored dragon, slightly smaller than all the rest. What he lacked in size, though, he more than made up for in muscle and speed. He had, from humans, acquired the nickname Bolt, of which he wore proudly. Here, at last, Huma decided, was a kindred spirit for Kaz. 4 or 5 lances between us will be no difficulty, Huma's Silver Dragon explained. The saddle? Huma began. I have had someone working on that, interjected Avondale. We have 4 saddles, which should suffice. I assure you that they will be more than capable of withstanding the rigors ahead. They'd better be, Kaz muttered. You said 4, Huma said. We have only 3, without mages, unless you think. I do not. The Argothian commander looked at Huma straight in the eye. In the name of Paladin and all of Ansalon, I forbid you from going and throwing yourself at the renegade in a futile attempt to rescue the mage. You yourself have spoken of how much the Dragonlances mean to the future of all of us. If you throw your life away, you are condemning us to the Dragon Queen's dark dreams. Inwardly, Huma felt shame at the relief that flowed through him upon hearing Avondale's words. Part of him desperately wanted to rescue his companion, while another part of him yearned for his own safety. Huma was torn. Who is to be our 4th member, then? I am. You? Kaz snorted in derision. Have all the world's commanders gone mad? Lord Avondale replied coldly. Farron is more than capable of stepping into my role. Despite his dislike of Solamnia, he is a practical man. He will not do anything to upset the situation, and I would trust no one more. What would your emperor say? Asked Boron, silent till now. What the emperor would say he may tell me if I survive. As I told you, I am fighting for Ergoth. I would never forgive myself if I placed another's life in such danger, though I am sure many would volunteer. Someone must go with you to represent Ergoth to your Grand Master, and it may as well be me. Huma agreed, albeit with great reluctance. They were in Avondale's hands at present, and there really was no choice, and he would be a good man to have on one's side, Huma decided. It was agreed that Huma would again ride the Silver Dragon, while Boron and Avondale would take the younger male and female respectively. This left Kaz with the volatile Bolt. As Huma had suspected, the Minotaur and the Bronze Dragon took to one another like 2 old soldiers. His only fear was that the 2 might take it on themselves to charge on ahead, and he voiced this opinion to the Silver Dragon. She chuckled. Bolt and Kaz do indeed make a troublesome pair, but the dragon at least knows better, I think. I shall warn him once we are in the air. Make sure it's understood that the warning is for both of them. There will be no doubts. They had wanted to leave without fanfare, but Farron would not hear of it. The second-in-command had an honor guard waiting to see them off. Bolt, especially, was intrigued by the Dragonlance. Already a terror in the skies, according to himself, he claimed he now had the perfect edge with the lance and Kaz in the saddle. The Silver Dragons all looked on it in poorly masked amusement, although Huma's did admit shortly thereafter that the Bronze Dragon's words were not bluster. He was indeed a formidable opponent. The dragons rose into the sky one at a time, with Huma and his mount the first, Kaz and Bolt the last. The sun was already well into the sky, but with the dragons bearing them... Cough, hiccup, that. But with the dragons bearing them, they would cover a vast distance that day in any case. By the time night had triumphed, they had long passed the border in Solamnia. One thing they had not thought of slowed them, though. The drizzle that had started in Ergoth was a downpour at this point, and all 4 riders were soaked. The dragons seemed unaffected, especially the Bronze, who seemed to enjoy the shafts of lightning that almost skewered them twice. At Huma's urging, they finally landed for the night, in the hope that the morning would bring better conditions. The dragons formed a protective square around them, and the 4 set up the 2 tents that Avondale had thought to bring along. The tent kept the rain from them, and Huma's only regret was that the true smell of a wet minotaur became very obvious as the night aged. In the morning, Kaz had the same comment about him. The rain did not cease, but it did lighten. The riders covered themselves with their cloaks or in the few blankets that they had brought. Thanks to the dragons, they would be within the vicinity of Vingard Keep within 2 days. Had they not been burdened by the extra lances, it would have taken them even less time. Still, their journey was by no means over, for now they were to face the Dragon Queen's forces. Drekos had a stranglehold on the heart of Solamnia, for he'd finally cut off the northern and southern routes into and out of Vingard, effectively creating a wall that encircled the keep. Supplies were becoming scarce. Control of the sky was still in question, but morale was having its effect even on the Dragons of Light. The only thing that had that had kept them going, the silver dragon revealed, was the rumor of the dragon lance. The male silver was in the lead when they felt the first probe in their direction. A presence was nearby, reaching out with magic to detect outsiders. The probe was no more than a momentary contact with their minds, but it was enough to send the entire group into an abrupt halt. My throat is getting scratchy, so we require beverage.
Look at how cute she is. She's so cute. She's such a good girl, too. Oof. I love my puppy. She's a good girl. There we go. Hey, baby. I love you. You're a good girl. I love you. You're so cute.
It's not quite bedtime. I'm not done reading. Oh, that feels a lot better. The four leviathans whirled and retreated some distance back along their route. They conferred as they flew. What was it we felt? Huma's female asked. A mind, not a dragon's mind, but a powerful human mind. Undisciplined, too. This one was never a student of the orders of magic. Not a cleric? The male shook his head. No, definitely a mage. A renegade. Huma looked around nervously. Surely he's not a threat to you. Physically, no, Huma. It was his own silver dragon who replied. But he would have no trouble in warning others of our presence, if he hasn't already. And those others may be a threat. His sole purpose is to watch the skies. Let me take him! Bolt shouted. What would you do, the young female silver asked, that you could possibly prevent him from sending out a message before you strike? The bronze dragon clamped his mouth shut. I think, the silver male commented, that an opening has been left for us. After all, he is only human. I will fly to a level much higher than we normally fly. Once there, it is possible that I can discover whether his range of power can extend that high. I must risk our discovery to be sure, he added, if my companion has no objections. Boron shook his head, though he gripped the saddle pommel tightly. What of the rest of you? There was no argument from the others. Taking that as a positive response, the male spiraled once, and then turned skywards. As Boron held on, the silver male began to soar higher and higher until he was lost in the cloud cover. Several minutes passed while the others waited anxiously. Then Huma spotted a form breaking through the clouds. Boron was rather pale, but otherwise seemed none the worse. His dragon seemed elated. I was correct. Oh, so typical of many earthbound minds. His search extends only to the cloud cover. As far as he's concerned, anything above that does not exist. I could have thought of that, complained Bolt. You did not, and neither did I, commented Huma's dragon. Now that I hear it, it amazes me. I had forgotten how close-minded some humans are. Still, he may yet come to that realization by accident, so we had better move quickly. The others followed Huma and his companion skyward, soaring up until they burst into the cloud cover, the mists, and then broke through the other side. From there, they estimated their present position from Vingard Keep and continued their journey. The dragons flew on through the night while the riders slept. Huma awoke to the sound of Kaz arguing with the great reptilian creatures about the need for them to land before every muscle in his body stiffened, war or no war. The dragons themselves were visibly tired and ready to land in order to get a new fix on their positions. First Bolt, then the others spiraled swiftly downwards. The bronze dragon disappeared into the silky white sea, followed quickly by the other silver female. Huma and the silver dragon followed next. The cool mist surrounded him, and he could not even see the dragon's head. A harsh, grating crash came from below them, and Huma's first thoughts were that they were entering into a tremendous storm, but then suddenly they were out of the cloud cover and into chaos. They had assumed incorrectly that they had crossed beyond the enemy forces. Huma's mind spun with horrible nightmares as he realized just how tightly the keep was surrounded. Fighting raged everywhere. Men and ogres were clashing furiously with one another. In Huma's eyes, it seemed as if the land below was swarming with the dead and the dying. Both sides were advancing and retreating at the same time, depending upon where one looked. It was chaos. The dragons of Takhisis continually dove down, assaulting both the ravaged lines of knights and any of their ogre allies who were unfortunate enough to get too near. There were dragons of gold, silver, bronze, and copper, but they always seemed outnumbered. Worse yet, there prevailed a sense of malevolent power all about that the courage of the good dragons could not seem to counter. Even up here, away from the battle, Huma could feel discouragement and surrender building up within his soul. Takhisis is here, Huma's companion muttered to him. She is here on Kryn, feeding our cousins with her power, chilling the minds of her enemies. Did not think she could retain so much of her power on the mortal plane. It is as if she were here before us herself. It was true. The Dragon Queen's presence was overwhelming. Huma shivered from a cold that threatened to numb his mind more than his body. How did one fight a goddess? Up ahead, Huma. Can you see it? His gaze followed the direction of her head pointed, and after wiping his eyes more than once, he identified the tiny object on the horizon. "Vingard, keep!" Kaz shouted from ahead of them. By now they could all see it, and the battle that seemed to cover every inch of ground all the way to its walls. Lord Avondale cried out and pointed to their right. A gold dragon battled two reds. The combat was fierce, and all three bore wounds. When it became obvious that the gold dragon was beginning to lose, Bolt waited no longer. With Kaz readying his dragon lance, the two charged into the fray. Suddenly, there were dragons everywhere, and most of them foes. All thoughts of food and rest vanished. There were only claws and teeth, the cries and the screams, the blood and the pain, and the dragon lances. The dark dragons here knew nothing of the lances, perhaps because Dracos had not wanted them to fear. They soon learned that fear, however, as one after another perished, and the points of the lances, which when pulled free were unstained and unscratched, and glowed with a brilliance all their own. The children of Takhisis soon began to turn and flee from that brilliance, for they marked it as easily as the sign of Paladin, and they had no power against him. Others, farther off, noted the frenzy with which their brethren had fled the battle, and assumed that the day was lost. The fleeing of the first dragon soon became a wave of confusion in the sky, as more and more retreated in uncomprehending panic. Freed from battling their counterparts, the dragons of Paladin added their strength to the knighthood, and the tide on the ground began to turn as well. First to the west, then the eastern lines of the Dragon Queen's forces began to bend, give, and then, at the last, crumble. Without the aid of their dragon allies, the ogres and humans who fought for the darkness lost courage, and many simply threw down their weapons and fled. Eventually, the fighting died. That the skies rumbled ominously and lightning blasted the mountains to the west disturbed only a few. A victory of some kind had been desperately needed, and it had been produced. No one at the time knew how, but they all gave thanks to Paladin and his house for the miracle, and then grimly waited to see what would happen next. Well past midday, 4 exhausted dragons landed in the courtyard of Vingard Keep. On their backs they each bore a rider, all of whom were pale and exhausted. A silvery glow encompassed the newcomers, and eventually someone realized that it was the great lances that glowed so godlike, and not the dragons and riders themselves. By that time, though, the stories were already spreading. So, I apologize for being away for so long, but life happens. I'm very happy that I get to read for you guys again. So, it is bedtime. You need to get some rest. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate you without having a single reason, then I can love you for exactly the same. Sleep well and stay safe.